And I saw some are prescribing and I saw some
Good evening,
Can you
ma'am.
hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you.
I can't hear you.
Well, can you hear me now, ma'am? Hello? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, now I can hear you. Okay,
good,
great.
ma'am.
Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. Good afternoon, ma'am. Yeah, it's really nice to see you.
कैसे हैं?
Very long time.
Thank you.
Madam, how are you?
Old
Madam?
friend, मैं बस ठीक हूँ. Thank you. आप कैसे हैं?
Nice to meet you today.
Yeah. Brother Ajay, can you please adjust your camera so that we can also see your face? Yeah, now it looks good.
Is there a language problem?
No, ma'am, no problem.
I can speak in English.
Yes, very much.
Hello?
Otherwise, I can give some parts in Hindi. I have no issue.
No issue, ma'am. It should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah. People are joining, so we'll wait for them.
Not an issue. Not an issue. How long do you want me to speak?
Well, around 35 minutes.
Okay.
And then that will be followed by discussions.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ma'am, did you receive my email I sent you yesterday?
Yes, I've sent back that form.
Okay, I have. Let me check today.
Yeah. I've
Thank
sent
you
you
very
the
much.
form. Yeah,
Thank
I filled it in and sent it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So are you having classes online?
Yes, we have online also, all mixture.
People are coming to the university.
Yes, people are coming. Like we have a roster, so accordingly, the faculties are coming. Yeah. But I think for office staffs, maybe no roster. I think they are supposed to come regularly.
आजकल कौन है पॉलिटिकल साइंस डिपार्टमेंट में चेप्पा?
हम लोग 3 हैं. मैं हूँ, प्रोफेसर रेड्डी है, एसवी रेड्डी, और प्रोफेसर अनुराग जोशी. We are 3.
रेड्डी कौन? मैं नहीं जानती.
वो एक्चुअली SIS से PhD किए प्रोफेसर मुस्कुन दुबे के साथ.
अच्छा, SIS से.
हाँ जी.
आप 3 ही रह गए हो? आपका तो बहुत बड़ा डिपार्टमेंट था.
सब रिटायर्ड हो गए. गोपाल रिटायर हुए अभी जुलाई में. और प्रोफेसर नारंग 3-4 साल उनको भी.
नारंग तो चले गए होंगे या?
हाँ जी. और उससे पहले प्रोफेसर नायक थे.
वो भी चले गए.
हाँ, ये लेफ्ट 3 अभी.
तो क्या वैकेंसीज नहीं है कि फिल नहीं हो रही?
नहीं, वैकेंसीज हैं, एडवर्टाइजमेंट भी आ गए और सब कुछ हो गया, बस वेटिंग फॉर द इंटरव्यूज. अब इंटरव्यू हो नहीं रहे ना कोरोना टाइम में. अदरवाइज एडवर्टाइजमेंट भी आया हुआ.
But in Delhi University, interviews are going on.
Delhi University for political science?
Yeah. Not maybe I think yesterday they had anthropology. Then that will be
I think in the colleges में चल रहे हैं शायद.
Colleges में.
हाँ जी.
Which
Not
college?
college, in the university.
No, department had it. Department.
Departments.
University had it, yeah.
Department of Political Science had interviews.
नहीं कोई और डिपार्टमेंट में होगा बेसिक कॉलेज से क्योंकि स्टूडेंट हमारे पास वो आते हैं ना कई बार रिपोर्ट के लिए आजकल वो कॉन्फिडेंशियल रिपोर्ट के लिए आता है कोई भी स्टूडेंट आपका नाम देता है कोई भी कैंडिडेट तो कॉलेज से आ रही है इस तरह से somebody applies to
So
the
there are
college
22 vacancies in the department, 22 vacancies, and they should now, it's time they start filling it in. क्योंकि अब तो वो शांता भी चली गई होगी, so I don't know how many people there are now. JNU तो भर रहा है अपनी vacancies.
हाँ वो तो भर रहा है they are very fast काफी तेज से भर रहे हैं
Hi Savita. Savita. Good to see you.
Yes, good to see you. Maybe she has to unmute her mic.
Savita, you have to, shall I? Okay. Is my voice okay? I don't have to do anything.
नहीं ठीक है ऑडिबल अच्छा है सुन रहे हैं सुन पा रहे हैं
Yeah. So you tell me when I have to start, okay?
Good afternoon, Neera.
How are you?
Very well.
Where are you? Acha, hi Savita. We were on a conference, what, a month ago?
Yes, good afternoon, Neera.
September.
Very well. Very well. Yes,
Where are you? Acha, hi Savita. We were on a conference, what, a month ago?
Yes, good afternoon, Neera. Yes, good afternoon, Neera. Yes, very well. Yes,
Where are you? Acha, hi Savita. We were on a conference, what, a month ago?
yes, good afternoon, Neera. Yes, good afternoon, Neera. Yes, good afternoon, very well. Yes,
Where are you? Acha, hi Savita. We were on a conference, what, a month ago?
yes, good afternoon, Neera. Yes, good afternoon, Neera. Very well. Yes, very well.
The number of conferences that are happening because I get all these letters, you know. So on Sunday there's one taking place in Calcutta, and they said Sobanlal Datta Gupta and Samir Das and all, ma'am, please speak. I said, on what? And they said secularism. So good to see academic life is carrying on.
Yeah, I think that cannot be really crushed.
I
think
hope so.
the market's still fragile. See, the market has to become predominant to be able to destroy us altogether.
Right.
participate in it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zichamo Yantan from School of Social Sciences. Well, I, on behalf of the Discussion Forum of School of Social Sciences, Indira Gandhi National Open University, take this wonderful opportunity to welcome each and every one of you to our, virtual, presentation on the topic, a special talk on the topic, importance of civil society. Well, this afternoon, we are extremely privileged to have Professor Neera Chandok in our midst, who actually needs no introduction. Well, she is a well-known, personality whose scholarship and academic achievements are well recognized, across the globe. And she taught in Delhi University for 44 years. And also was a visiting professor in some of the prestigious, leading universities in the world. And she has been well recognized by several institutions for her excellent contributions in the field of research and education. And she is also the author of some of the leading books like The Concepts of Civil Society, Beyond Secularism, both Oxford University Printing Press publication, and also State and Civil Society by Sage publication, and of course many more. Well, she is also without any doubt one of the public intellectuals we have in the country today. And thank you very much, Professor Neera Chandok ma'am, for accepting our invitation to deliver a special talk on the topic, importance of civil society. Well, civil society is important not only for democracy, but also for good life. When a society develops a culture of debate, the outcome will always be fruitful because that society begins to debate good citizenship and how citizens can live good life ethically, culturally, and aesthetically. This is a quote from Professor Neera Chandok. Well, thank you once again, Professor Neera Chandok, for accepting our invitation to be the speaker for today's special talk. And well, today the session will be chaired by Professor Jakpal Singh, who is a professor in the discipline of political science in School of Social Sciences, Indira Gandhi National Open University. He is a very committed political scientist whose research works, are well received by many political scientists and also researchers across the country. And well, his recent book is Caste, State and Society, Degrees of Democracy in North India by Routledge publication. By the way, this book is to be released tonight in London. the book which I have just mentioned the title. This is to be released tonight in London, and the book is the book examines the politics of social, cultural, and political recognition of caste groups in North India, and it also explores the factors that makes some caste politically influential, while others continue to remain socially and economically marginalized. Of course, this is just one of his publications. There are several other more publications which he has done. So thank you very much, Professor Chakpal Singh, for accepting our invitation to share today's session. Well, personally, I am very, very excited about today's special talk, because I know it is going to be very stimulating and engaging discourse. So, well, without wasting time, now I would like to give time to our respected director, Professor Rashmi Sinha, to kindly pronounce the welcome address from the School of Social Sciences. Thank you.
Should I start, or somebody else is speaking?
Yes, the director will give the welcome address. Yeah. Please unmute your mic, Professor Rashmi. Yes.
Good afternoon to all. Just a slight correction, Yanthan.
Yes.
The book is already released.
Yes. It's already released. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So what has to be done later in the day, it's already there. Okay, chalo. Anyway, so School of Social Sciences, as you all know, has been organizing seminars on a regular basis, but this time there has been slight delay because of unavoidable reason. But indeed, we are very lucky to again start it. In fact, with Professor Neera Chandok, our star attraction for today, it's a proud privilege to welcome her to the webinar on importance of civil society. Despite her very, very busy schedule, she could give us another time, because actually she was supposed to speak a few days back. But since we were having many commitments in the school itself from different disciplines, we just could not honor her given time at that time. So I'm very sorry for it, ma'am. But nevertheless, we heartily welcome you today for the webinar, and a very warm welcome to all those who are attending this. We all know she is an acclaimed scholar, both at national and international level, and her important position, which just now Dr. Yanthan mentioned, becomes more important because of her invaluable contribution to whatever she has done. Thank you, and once again, welcome you, ma'am, and over to listening to your very dynamic lecture today. Thank you so much.
Sorry. Thank you, Professor Rashmi Ji, Director, School of Social Sciences, for giving the welcome address. Now we will start the presentation, and I would like to give time to the chairperson for today, Professor Chakpal Singh. But before that, I would like to make small announcement. Let us all keep our, our speakers mute. That is one. And after ma'am's presentation, there will be, question and answer discussion that will be followed. And well, it will be a little difficult virtually to give time to everybody. So what I will request is, if you can type the questions on the chat box, we can take it down from there, and we can, put forward the question. So thank you very much, and I give time to the chairperson for today, Professor Chakpal Singh. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yanthan. In fact, indeed, it's my privilege to be part of the program where Professor Chandok is giving lecture. We have been beneficiary of her writings. In fact, we have grown with her writings, and we have read them, especially works on political theory and civil society. Today's topic, as we know, is very important, especially in the context of today. So I will not take much time now. I request Professor Chandok to deliver her lecture and let us make us benefit from her views. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jakpal, and thank you very much for inviting me and meeting so many old friends virtually, literally. I still remember the time when a number of us used to come to IGNOU when they were setting up when you guys were setting up your Department of Political Science and discussing the courses which were going to be introduced. So we watched this with great interest, and we are very happy it's come up as a very, very major university in India and in South Asia, and perhaps a model for the rest of the world. So I'm very, very happy to be here and very pleased to be meeting several old friends. You know, there is this story about Moliere's Bourgeois Gentleman, where the character, the protagonist, Jourdain, suddenly recognizes that he's been speaking prose all his life. Somewhat like that, a number of social scientists in India, historians, political scientists, sociologists, and generally a whole range of scholars, had been discussing social movement, peasant struggles, workers' struggles, and a whole range of mobilization in India, without recognizing that they were speaking of something that came to be known as civil society in the 1990s, which actually swept across the world. There are possibly three reasons why the concept of civil society caught the imagination of social scientists across the world. It's not only in India, but certainly in India, and suddenly the language, the vocabulary, the imaginary of civil society started dominating discussions, political discussions, and particularly the policies of donor organizations and international organizations, largely based in the West. The first reason is, of course, the translation into English of two major works. One was Antonio Gramsci's Selection from Prison Notebooks, which was translated into English in 1971. And the second was the translation of Jürgen Habermas's Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere, which was made available a little later in 1989. Both these philosophers, in their own way, had catapulted the notion of civil society onto the center of political vocabularies and political languages. Gramsci, in a way, to talk about how the dominant classes hegemonize society through associations in civil society, and Habermas, of course, how a public sphere emerges in Europe in the early 19th century through sites of social mobilization like cafes and salons and coffee clubs and a whole range of other associations. So as we got exposed to these two great works, Antonio Gramsci, who is no more, of course, and Professor Jürgen Habermas, who at the age of 90, I may tell you, has just authored a 1,600-page book called Religion and Philosophy. I was in Berlin in November, and I was told that his book is now being translated into English, and that is his commitment to the notion of a public sphere. The second reason why civil society becomes very important for political practices and scholarship is the experience of East Europe. Now, East Europe younger people will not remember what used to be called the Second World. The First World was, of course, the capitalist liberal countries of Europe and the United States, of Western Europe. And Eastern Europe was the Stalinist bloc. It was the Soviet bloc. They were completely dominated by the Soviet Union, and they were denied basic civil and political liberties, as actually existing communist societies began to pulverize any kind of opposition. Now, in the 1970s, activists in Eastern Europe, and particularly Poland, which catapulted the notion of civil society, realized that traditionally two options that had been available to people who were struggling under oppression were denied to them. The first option was revolution from above, when elites transformed societies, as was the case of Germany and Japan in the late 19th century. The second option was revolution from below. And it was the case of course, Russia in 1917 and China in 1949. And then, of course, Cuba and Southern America and a whole range of other colonies in Africa, for example, Mozambique, they all had struggles from below. They could not adopt any one of these options to get out of the very stultifying political atmosphere which had denied them freedom of expression, because Soviet Union had said that we will intervene every time you challenge power. So what the East Europeans did was to turn their backs on the state and start connecting. Now we have to understand that authoritarian states always deny, the first denial is the right to association. Because who knows when a social association will become a political revolution. East Europeans in the 70s, but more particularly the 80s, and this is, Germany, this is Czechoslovakia, this is Yugoslavia, this is Albania, the entire region around the Balkans, which started associating in all kinds of associations, from reading clubs to discussion forums to soup clubs to film clubs to literary associations. The idea was to connect. Now, when people connect, and this is why authoritarian leaders always fear associational life, you start discussing things as they are and things as they should be. And through these connections and interconnections, they mounted a critique of actually existing socialist societies. There was a very, very important journal which used to come out in the 1980s, right up to 1989. It was called Praxis. And the idea of turning your back upon the state and actually connecting with each other in civil society became the object of much discussion. I still remember it was a very exciting journal. It used to be available in Teen Murti. It has stopped publishing shortly thereafter. And everybody was talking about the experiments of East Europeans to escape authoritarian state power. Now, what did they want? In 1989, the unthinkable happened. There were these crowds of hundreds and thousands of people who actually assembled on the streets of major capital cities of Eastern Europe and said, we want democracy. And so many states collapsed. Can you imagine the East German state collapsing, or Yugoslavia collapsing, Czechoslovakia, like the proverbial house of cards, before agitating crowds? In Brazil, intellectuals, students, workers joined together, and professionals joined together to protest against the military regime. So we have to understand there was a major shift from the freedom struggle, where the peasants took an important part, to civil society as a quintessentially urban middle-class phenomena. We have to understand the shift. Peasants are not a part of civil society. Civil society is quintessentially urban. It consists of professionals, students, people who want just freedom of expression. They want constitutional democracy. They want rule of law. They want rights. I mean, John Locke, the liberal thinker, could have scripted the entire drama of civil society. Anyway, in 1989, we had these velvet revolutions, and communism collapsed in Eastern Europe. And in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. For the West, civil society came to be associated with democracy and with anti-authoritarianism. So the West took up civil society with a great deal of fervor. And a whole range of donor agencies, including the United Nations and, of course, World Bank, which regularly give money to NGOs, started building civil society in third world countries because they were bringing democracy to the third world. Now, the civil society argument, very briefly, is as follows. There are two sorts of arguments that make up the civil society argument, which was adopted by the East Europeans, and their inspiration was de Tocqueville. The first argument is that in modern times, people are alienated, they are alone, they are atomized, because natural communities have broken apart. They come to cities where they're completely unknown and possibly the unknowable. Now, how do you battle? We have to remember that modernity gave rise to two disciplines. One was sociology, the other was psychiatry. Psychiatry is quintessentially a product of modernity because modernity is alienating. Whatever Marx had said about modernity still holds good. There are no organic relationships which buttress the individual, give her a sense, give her an address, give her a sense of who she is, where she has come from. Because a modern individual is a lonely individual. The modern individual is self-referential. And for those of us who grew up on Ayn Rand's Fountainhead, Howard Roark represents the quintessential modern. He's lonely. He cannot connect with everybody. He's an architect. And he builds the most amazingly alienating buildings, sharp squares with no reference to history. And if you do not have a reference to history, if you do not know where you've come from, you're a lost individual. The way out of individuation and alienation of modern life is to create associations, to create forums where people can get together. So you can have film societies, you can have soccer clubs, you can have bird watching societies, environmental clubs, and so on and so forth. The idea is that you form friends. The only stipulation is these societies must be voluntary. Your individual must have the right to enter and the right to exit. The second idea that permeates civil society and which has become very, very important in our political life is the idea that ordinary individuals possess what Habermas called political competence. That is, our participation in democracy does not end with elections. It stretches through associational life in the period between elections because civil society organizations keep a watch on the state to see that the state does not abuse power. They monitor the state for all its acts of omission and commission. The idea that people can participate through deliberation, through discussion, through imagining a desirable future, through solidarity is actually an Aristotelian virtue that human beings are born political, but it also was adapted for the purposes of contemporary life by reference to the teachings of Tocqueville. I mean, Tocqueville started asking, what protects the individual against state power in the United States? Because US was a slave society, but it was never a feudal society. And then he said, US has associations. They have a remarkable propensity to create and sustain associational life. The idea that ordinary individuals possess the political competence to hold the state to account becomes integral to the democratic imagination after the civil society argument took hold. And this comes to India in the 80s, but more particularly in the 1990s, through international global discourse on civil society. Now, India had gone through a very traumatic period because the process of democracy had been ruptured by Mrs. Gandhi imposing internal emergency. And for 2 years, suspending civil liberties. It is very, very remarkable that the first association in India after the emergency was lifted in January 1977 was the Civil Liberties Organization, PUCL, and the PUDR, which had a whole host of civil liberty organizations. And then India, of course, saw a proliferation of organizations. You had the anti-caste movement, you had the gender movement, the anti-patriarchy movement, you had environmental movement, you had the Narmada Bachao Andolan, which began in 1984, and which challenges the power of the Indian state to do with its people as it will. Now, after that, when you have the creation of associational life in India after the emergency, very noted political scientists, sociologists actually, Rajni Kothari and D.L. Sheikh, started talking about the non-party political process, started talking about non-party democracy. And this, of course, was a gift of J.P. Narayan when he had led major demonstrations against Mrs. Gandhi's authoritarian regime. So civil society becomes the anchor of democracy, not only due to the political discourse, but also due to internal development within the country, particularly after the emergency was lifted. And I'm going to come in a moment to the importance of civil liberties, but let me move on to one important caveat that we have to understand. That we have to understand the significance of civil society in light of this caveat. You see, a whole range of Western political theorists started talking about civil society as the space. I mean, what is civil society? And it is the space between the family, between the household, between the state, and between the market. Now, the household is a realm of unreflective imagination and emotion, so you leave the household aside. The state is marked by the pursuit of power, and the market is marked by the pursuit of profit. Now, as a they counterpose civil society to the logic of profit and the logic of power, and said in civil society, you have the logic of solidarity, where you identify with your fellow citizens in ensuring justice. In fact, the civil society argument brings a very important amendment to the social contract. The social contract is not only a contract signed between the people and the state, it is a contract signed between fellow citizens which promises each other that you will reclaim their rights in case the state transgresses. Therefore, all the PUDR organizations or Andhra Pradesh Civil Liberties Movement, or all the PUCL split up into various regional organizations, PUCL, People Union of Civil Liberties, were concentrating on violation of rights and publicizing it, giving reports and acting as a check on the state. But in the meantime, in the 1990s, another global discourse envelopes the world, and that is complete concern about poverty. I was reading today Amitabh Beher, who's the president of Oxfam. In January 2020, the human rights group Oxfam released a study in Davos ahead of the 50th anniversary of the World Economic Forum. The study reported that in India, the richest 1% of the population in India owns more than 4 times the wealth held by 953 million people, or 70% of the population. The gap between the rich and the poor, 1% and 70%, and Amitabh Beher was on television talking about it, cannot be resolved without decisive intervention. But few governments are committed to decisive intervention. Now, for a whole range of reasons, in the 1990s, acute concern with poverty comes up in the capitals of the world, and this is particularly because activists in what we call global civil society had started demonstrating outside the World Bank. 50 years is enough. The World Bank at that time was taken over by Ravi Kanpur, and they targeted, World Bank used to be an organization which buttressed supported capitalism. Suddenly their hearts started bleeding for the poor, and a great deal of energy went into seeing their governments deliver. At the same time, in the 1990s, if we remember, those of us old enough to do so, globalization had swept the world. And in a way, national elites could not even keep control of their own economy. So on the one hand, you have the globalization of the economy. On the other hand, you have a focus not on redistribution, but on giving the people enough to eat, what is called sufficientarianism in political philosophy. At that point, a whole range of donor agencies and governments, including the Indian government, started encouraging NGOs to deliver social goods to the people: health, education, particularly female sexuality in the sense of maternal health and mortality and environment and so on and so forth. And we saw what came to be known as the NGOization of civil society. Because civil society in traditional political theory is supposed to be a spontaneous movement. It is supposed to be neighborhood associations, people coming together in webs of solidarity. But NGOs, a whole range of them, were very professional, very well funded, and they actually partnered the state. A number of insiders said, how can we carry out a critique of the state when we are being funded by the state? So in a way, what was happening was, as the state shed its social delivery responsibility to NGOs, the NGOs were bailing out the state from non-performance. Issues actually took a very important, interesting turn in 2001 at the beginning of the 21st century. In 2001, the POCL Rajasthan goes to the Supreme Court and says, it cites the central and 22 state governments for having defied the law of famine. They said the British never allowed people to die of hunger. Now, India had overflowing food stocks in 2001, and yet people were dying of hunger. So the Supreme Court issued, this was Vajpayee's government, the first NDA government, the Supreme Court issued a very strict warning to the government saying, how can you allow people to die? And please, they appointed food commissioners. They said, you must give the right to food and the right to work to the people of India. Now, on 15th August in 2001, Prime Minister Vajpayee announces the Swaran Jayanti Swarajgar Yojana, which was actually the right to work. And a number of Supreme Court decisions talked about two rights, the right to work and the right to information, and of course the right to primary education. Now, interestingly, the Supreme Court, which had been complicit in the emergency, because they did not uphold the civil liberties of ordinary Indian citizens against the ravages of the emergency, wanted to rework its own image. So it became a protector of the poor. Justice Bhagwati made a number of decisions, announced a number of decisions, which showed that they were concerned about the fate of the Indian people. 2004, when the UPA-1 takes over, Mrs. Sonia Gandhi appointed the National Advisory Commission. And they carried on these rights which the Supreme Court had talked of. And 5 or 6 very important rights become a part of social policy, attended by a different kind of mobilization, campaign, lobbying, talking to members of parliament, talking to media, and generally creating a kind of a public opinion that people must be given the right to food, the right to work, the right to primary education, the right to information. These were the most important acts, except for the right to education, primary education, which becomes a part of Article 21. The rest of these rights are legal rights. Now, what they effectively did was to raise the directive principles of state policy, that is Section 4 of the Constitution, to the status of fundamental rights. So you had social legislation, which was the result of civil society mobilization and a very interventionist Supreme Court in the period of UPA-1. 2014, the NDA-2 government took over power. The BJP took over power. And the BJP, of course, has always been a middle-class party. It was not particularly interested in the poor, but there were a number of critical interventions by the opposition, and they decided to go in for social policy. Now, there is a difference between civil society intervention, mobilization, agitation, demonstrations, meetings, sit-ins, campaigns, media coverage in civil society leading to a social right. On the other hand, what was happening is the BJP has announced a whole range of social good. This is the Singaporean model. You give to people social goods through social policy. You do not give them the right to organize or demonstrate. You see? So civil society organizations were actually their wings were clipped. Their accounts were frozen. The activists were seen as suspicious, and many of them have been arrested. And in a way, civil society becomes pulverized. And a number of NGOs wrote to the Prime Minister during the first phase of this government, 2014 to 2019, saying, Mr. Modi, we are just doing what the Constitution of India has promised people. Why are you harassing us? But in a way, you have social policy, but you don't have social mobilization. And this is a distinction that has to be emphasized because this is a classic East Asian model. You have dictatorial government that give to their people food, but do not allow them the right to protest. And this is exactly what is happening in India. Now, there is a very interesting issue that comes up here, and this is about my last point. The issue is that, we tend to think of individual rights as coming to us in stages. This is the classic model. First, you have political and civil liberties. Then you have social and economic rights. And then you have the right to fraternity, which is the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity. When UPA won, encouraged the passing of social policy under Professor Manmohan Singh's government, many people, people across the world were saying, my God, is there a social revolution in India? And they started saying that India has charted out a unique way to social democracy through civil society intervention. In effect, then many of us had thought that we have already secured political and civil liberties, and now we can move on to social and economic rights. Under the present government, we have a very significant dilemma occurring. The government is giving you social policy, right? There's health insurance, there is education, there's money coming into people's bank accounts, yes? But civil liberties are being hijacked. So the civil liberty to protest, to demonstrate, today the Supreme Court has said you can demonstrate, but not in public spaces. Now, occupation of public spaces is a very important mode of protest. But we have a judiciary that more or less has been indifferent to civil liberties. So the first right that has been hijacked these days is the right to life, the right to liberty, the right to freedom of expression. But a more important right that was going to be damaged, and that is the right to citizenship. Because the CAA was going to be followed by, probably still is going to be followed by the National Register of Citizens. That would mean our right to citizenship doesn't come naturally to us by virtue of being born in India. The right to citizenship means you have to prove that you're a citizen of India. What the Europeans call papier citizenship. And this right that the CAA sent shivers of apprehension among the people and among the minorities, because we know that the Indian government would allow people from neighboring countries to come into India, provided they are not Muslims. And suddenly, 15th of December, we all said, what is going to happen? Civil society is pulverized. Nobody is going to speak up. Your bank accounts are frozen. They have no money to do their volunteerism. They don't have the courage to speak up because you can get arrested. Look at the way the Delhi police has arrested people who were in this anti-CAA movement. And suddenly, the students arose in a major civil society mobilization, which only was stopped by the pandemic. The issue I want to put across to you is the following, and maybe we'll stop here for the discussion. We tend to think of rights as coming to us in stages, and this is a famous discussion by Marshall, that first you have economic political rights, then you have first you have political and civil liberties, and then economic and social rights, and then the right to fraternity. We have realized that rights come in a package. Civil society cannot say that we have already secured social and political liberty, firstly by the Constitution, and secondly after the emergency by the civil liberties movement, because it is precisely these rights that are at stake today. That would mean that civil society organizations now have to fight on all levels, not only for social and economic rights, social rights being the right to health, the right to education, the right to the basic preconditions of life, economic rights being the right to labor, to form trade union, the right to protest. And governments have passed legislation against the labor right to protest. Right? And political and civil right, that is our right as a citizen and our right to liberty and life. That means Article 19 and Article 21 have to be now fought for. We thought the work had been done by the freedom struggle, but now we have realized these rights can be taken away. And it was so heartening to see young people engaging in what we call performative citizenship. holding up the flag, singing the national anthem, saying reading the preamble, saying we are citizens of India, you cannot take it away. We reject the whole notion of papier citizenship. We are performative citizens. But we don't know what is going to happen. So it strikes me that today civil society is at a crossroads. It is at a crossroads because you look at the shutting down of Amnesty in Bangalore recently. Their bank accounts have been frozen. The ED has got into the act. Akar Patel has had to resign. One of the most gifted journalists, I think, that India has. And the important distinction is that the government is not targeting delivery organizations. They're targeting advocacy organizations. They're targeting human rights organizations or civil liberty organizations. I think there is one lesson from the anti-CAA protests that we have to learn, and that is solidarity. We have to stand in solidarity with our citizens, whether in the beleaguered frontier regions of India, where their civil liberties are at stake. And we have to say that we, the people of India, will not allow our fellow citizens to be stripped of their rights. And that is the job of civil society. I'll end here. And maybe we could have a discussion. Yes, I already have some discussions. I do not mention the Hazare movement. You tell me, should I answer now or should I answer together? Jagpal?
Yes.
Hello. We can take the questions and Yanthan?
Actually, we have just, maybe you can, if there is anybody, they can directly ask questions because we do not have, we just have one question that have just come. Let me, yeah.
Yes, I think that was an important civil society movement, the India Against Corruption. My only reservation about this movement is that it enclosed a whole range of organizations that were antithetical to each other, from the extreme left to the extreme right. And that highlights the essential nature of civil society, that civil society is not a homogeneous entity. It is a site of confrontation between democratic and anti-democratic organizations. That means democratic organization and civil society have to be Janus-faced. They have to be two-faced. One face has to be towards the state, that it does not transgress its own limits and it observes the rule of law. And the second face has to be towards undemocratic organizations in civil society. So my conclusion is that I think the Anna Hazare movement taught us an important lesson, that civil society is itself conflictual. There's nothing homogeneous about civil society. People hold different views, and these views often are in conflict. So it is, as the great German philosopher Hegel said, the theater of history, because it is the theater of contestation.
Is there any question? Yanthan, can I then, I think I just wanted to ask question in the end, but if,
may I ask?
Please, yeah, please, yeah.
So my question is, am I audible?
Yes.
All right, Nira. First of all, I must congratulate you. It was very nice. You put it everything so much in a chronological manner. It just reminded me that once upon a time we had a civil society. It is this that is the aesthetic part of this discussion. But let me come to where you left, Nira, that civil society has inherently been conflictual. All the associations don't gel together. They have a broader framework within which, say, the framework is set by democratic culture or democratic polity, right? So in a way, there is something that has happened with the framework itself. The democratic culture, I mean to say, where people don't have to go to the court. People don't have to always agitate for certain rights, as you mentioned. Some rights, which are the fruits of democracy, are already given. As a result of which we are supposed to be evolving as a society, as a democratic society. And we were to see other newer kinds of not only rights, as you know, how many other rights have been added to the kitty. You know, the community rights of various kinds in theory of rights. You have seen this whole argument going on. But also people were expecting to experience new kinds of freedoms as well. I think it is that imagination that human beings need more freedom and less repression. That is the crossroad at which we are standing today. This mode of production, which is called capitalism, and which we are euphemistically calling globalization at the moment, wants more repression. And that is why this framework is in a surreptitious manner, and sometimes even openly, has become is being getting nullified. Meaning to say, it is not a conflictual thing that we are talking about. We are talking about a major damage that has happened to the framework itself, within which the possibility of civil society was a beautiful dream and reality. I would like to know, where should we go from here? Not only in terms of rights that civil societies have often fought for, but also new forms of freedoms that we were imagining, because the mode of production has allowed so much technological development to take place. So much wealth has been created. New horizons have been broken in space and all that. But here we find ourselves being reduced as if we are non-imaginative human beings, as we have no right to imagine a future that will bring new ways of life.
Ideally, civil society is a site of deliberative democracy, where you do not bring in weapons, you bring in only the skill of argument. And you meet arguments with arguments, and you deliberate about where we have come from and where we are possibly going in the near future. You are completely right that a number of rights have come to the forefront of our imagination, of our political imagination, because of struggles. And the right to alternative sexualities, for instance. Or you have the right of women. I mean, in 2012, when the Nirbhaya rape case happened, Professor Manmohan Singh did set up the Justice Verma Committee, in which the notion of rape was enlarged beyond the traditional notion, whatever it may be. There are a number of rights, for example, Patta Tumhara, Zameen Hamari, which have come up to us from rural areas. My only problem is that if you look at civil society in isolation from the state, or indeed from society, you're in danger of glamorizing the sphere, because different spheres of human interaction are not autonomous from each other. How can we be uninfluenced by the market when even the humblest of civil society organizations needs a few funds to carry on its activities? How can we be oblivious to the state? And here it is important, as you said, the framework, the pillar of the framework that has been overturned. It was argued that a democratic state needs a democratic civil society. Today we have to say a democratic civil society also needs a democratic state. Unless you have a democratic state, how are you going to have democracy in civil society? When every expression of dissent is labeled as treason, how are you going to even...
There's some problem with the sound?
I think there is some network connectivity with her, I think.
Because she was answering it so well.
Yeah.
See, I actually sort of throw this question again, even others who are watching. We do have to, when we talk about civil society, we are not only talking about civil society per se, we're talking about the framework within which civil society flourished or flourishes or is not flourishing. It is very important to understand, have we crossed over? I mean, this was the second question I would have asked her. Are we in a post-democratic framework? How are we going to fare as a society in that kind of structure and framework? That's the question.
Then I think there's some problem that side, no?
There is a network problem, I think, on her side.
Have some questions come, Jonathan?
No, there is a question, but then if she is not around, then
we
will just, maybe I'll call her up and see.
Yeah.
Maybe in the meantime, if there is anybody who would like to give their comments or, I think on the lecture, I think it will be also nice to engage ourselves.
Ajay Mahulkar? Ajay, you're muted or? Ajay? Ajay is not available.
He is here, I don't know. Maybe right now, I think. Can see him.
You know, there is a new concept that has come into this whole discourse of democracy and civil society. It's called responsibility of liberty. If Neera were around, I would discuss that with her also. We have to take responsibility to be free, to know that we can be right-bearing individuals. And it is not fear that should subdue our understanding of who we are. It should be the consciousness of responsibility towards ourselves. It is this that is very important.
Anybody else? Any comment? Any?
Ma'am has already joined in.
Okay. Welcome back. Welcome back.
So, hello, ma'am. There was some problem. Anyway, I hope let her just come in.
Maybe net issue.
Net issue. So she has joined on from her mobile. That's what I see. Sometimes we have this challenge, but I hope, it's fine. Sometimes it happens on virtual, programs. Yeah, she's already here.
Okay, can we?
Yeah.
She's there. She has to unmute herself. Ma'am, please unmute.
Please unmute your mic.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The light went off, so my connection went. Yeah. Okay, that's it. I'm back.
Is it all? I mean, have you replied to the question, ma'am, or you? Savita ji,
no, I think I've answered the question.
Okay.
Yeah. Well.
Any other questions, Savita ji?
The second one which I threw while she was gone was there is now there is this whole thing about post-democratic state in which we have, it seems, in which we have sort of slipped into, being forced into. So the status of civil society, the changing notions of who we are as individuals. You know, that point that you mentioned about, I mean, it's a kind of a broader, generalized question that I'm giving it to you, philosophical also. Do you think a state can satisfy an informed individual, or when I say informed individual, I mean to say citizen, by reducing its political consciousness to social consciousness by offering social policies and exchanging it rather with political rights and freedoms?
It all depends upon what you expect our subject, our discipline, political science to be. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, you're audible, ma'am. Yeah.
You know, if the objective of politics for democratic theory is to allow citizens to have a say in the way that their government is run, or to have a say in public affairs, to have their voice heard, to acquire agency, then social policy from above doesn't really help them. They become consumers of policies enunciated from above. On the other hand, the whole idea of struggle and mobilization is to allow people to have a say, to bring consciousness to the people. You know, we have to remember civil society signifies the end of revolution. We no longer have a revolutionary imaginary to propel our political imaginations. It is civil society. Now, civil society activists have to mobilize people against oppression. If you're going to have policies from the top, you're going to pulverize this whole notion of agency. I mean, if the objective is welfare, then you can do it from above. That's not the issue. But if the objective is to actually mobilize people and encourage them to have a say in the running of their society, or to develop consciousness of oppression and what to do about it, then probably you need mobilization on a scale which even in contemporary civil societies has been forgotten. Because now they just, you know, you have these professionalized NGOs, which we have to be careful of. That's what I want to say.
Ajay, you have any question? Ajay Maukar, comment or question? Ajay, could you hear me?
Okay, I think there is one question from Dr. Shubhangi from School of Interdisciplinary Studies. Her question is, how would you foresee the future of civil society in a post-pandemic world? That is her question.
To retrieve our autonomy from all these governments and leaders who have taken over enormous power. And this has happened across the world. It has not only happened in India. You have leaders in Europe who are rather prime ministers, elected prime ministers, who have stultified the judiciary and the rule of law in order to take action against, to control the pandemic. And I think we have to begin the task of retrieving our autonomy from the state, because it is important to be autonomous of state power, and that would be a very important. And for example, retrieving the autonomy of the media. Now, if a media becomes, it doesn't speak back to power, it is no longer a part of civil society, it is part of the state ideological apparatus. If the judiciary is not going to fight for the civil liberties of its citizens, it's no longer the guardian of civil liberties and of the dignity of the individual. We probably have to begin anew to fight for our civil liberties and our political rights, because social rights in the absence of civil and political rights can be hijacked without anybody having the power of raising their voice. That's what I want to say. It's a very awesome task we have on hand. I think there's a question about peasants organization. Do you?
Yes, this is a question from one faculty from Ambedkar University, Dr. Nixon. Well, his question is, well, you mentioned about civil society organization are an urban phenomenon. So what about the issues in rural areas, like farmers demanding MSP, which are spearheaded by Kishan Chapa? So how do you see the difference between the two grouping, pressure groups and CSO? That is the question.
I have to correct myself. I said it emerged as an urban phenomena. Wherever civil society mobilizations were, they were in cities, they were professionals, they were middle-class educated people, they were students, they were, lawyers and all kinds of activists. If they take up rural issues, of course the link between the rural and the urban is so strong these days that you can no longer speak of the two. But if urban organizations, if the media takes up the issue of rural India, then of course it's a part of civil society. It emerged as an urban phenomenon. It emerged as a phenomenon where people just got together. And, you know, you look at the Arab Spring. You look at Nepal, anti-monarchy agitation. You look at the lawyers' movement in Pakistan. And then you look at the anti-CAA in India. These were predominantly urban. But it's a tricky question. I'm not very sure, but if given that the media has taken up the issue of minimum support price, we would say that civil society has taken up the issues which pertain to the rural economy. The main point I was making is that freedom struggles in most part of the developing world were basically peasant-oriented. And civil society movements, you know, transferred the whole onus of the struggle to urbanized professionals. They were seen as elitist by many critics of civil society.
Okay.
I think there is a question from Ajay Mahurkar in chat box.
You can directly ask her. Unmute your mic.
I've unmuted you. You have to unmute your mic.
Yeah. Bro, Professor Ajay, please unmute your mic and ask your question.
So actually, he is written in the chat box. Shall I read it out, or
Okay.
you do not mention the Anna Hazare and India Against Corruption movement in your narrative? Why is that not part of civil society mobilization? That is his question.
I answered that question.
I think that
You answered that, yeah. I think Subhangi's question has been answered.
Yes. Yeah.
There is
Climate change.
There is still one more question.
Climate change.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Well, how do you encourage civil society organizations? A, you sign innumerable petitions. You know, it's all become now cyberspace activism. You no longer have to attend meetings. So one is, of course, build up support groups. And the other is through contributions to funding. And I may add that one of the most interesting phenomena I have seen in recent times is the attempt of print newspapers, e-journals, to become independent of funding by capitalist corporate world. It's happening in The Wire in India, but it's also happening in France in Le Monde, in Britain in Guardian. Now, more and more newspapers are trying to liberate themselves from corporate funding or state, what are they called, advertisements, so that they can really become independent media. I think it's time to start the same kind of a movement where television is concerned, because our TV channels are owned by corporate. And the tilt towards a pro-establishment stance is so obvious. So in a way, you encourage movements like climate change or their independence of the media by speaking up for them, whether it's signing petitions or representations or becoming members of these associations, attending meetings, virtual meetings these days, and generally showing that they have support. Public opinion is behind them. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, then
We don't have any more questions on the chat. So
ma'am, can I have a question actually?
Yes, please.
You can see we have variations of democratic civil society movements in our country. In certain states, you have democratic forces very active.
Sorry, who's speaking? I can't.
I'm Jakpal.
Jakpal. Sorry, Jakpal.
Yeah. So we have variations in the patterns or levels of civil society mobilization, democratic civil society mobilization.
Yes.
Like if you see place like UP, whether it is a caste issue or communal issue or gender question, you don't see response from the democratic section of section of the society, or it is absent. Democratic section is absent. But if you see place like Rajasthan or in some states in South India, people respond to the social concerns. How do we explain the variations in the pattern of democratic civil society organizations. Because as you have mentioned in one of your books, that civil society is a space where all kinds of forces exist. So in certain places, democratic forces either are absent or indifferent or inactive. In certain, they are quite active. How do we explain this?
Well, some civil society organizations are active in these matters, some are not. They're just subcontracting for the state. I'm talking about activists that stand up for human rights, stand up for the rights of their people. Now, again, UP is one example of this government that is completely repressive. They don't tolerate any dissent. And this has been happening through a very clever ideological move of typing every case of dissent as treason or as anti-national. The attempt is to identify the government with the state. It is a particularly unhappy form of it's a very unhappy development, because yesterday when I saw that the horrible way in which a young woman died, it should have been a matter for human rights organizations. They've been made an international conspiracy. I mean, I can't understand where this is happening from. And I think civil society activists are at risk in UP because the police has become trigger happy. UP is particularly unfortunate a case to dwell upon. And that's what I said again and again, we have to recognize the limits of civil society. A democratic civil society requires a democratic state. Otherwise, civil societies cannot function in authoritarian states, and UP does have an authoritarian state. I myself was taken aback. I mean, all of us were, when this conspiracy theory was put forth, and no attempt to either apologize or to even look at the intricacies of one of the most terrible deaths of a young woman. This is not the first time this has happened, but these are brushed under the carpet in the name of conspiracy, which incidentally say inhibits development. Now, development, since the time of communist Russia, has been used as an alibi to stifle rights. We should be wary of the vocabulary of development, because development, what does development mean for whom? Who develops and who doesn't develop? I mean, we have to ask these questions. But development is used as an alibi or as an excuse for every part of repression. So in a way, it is the task of social scientists now, I think, to unmask this entire concept of development as being inherently authoritarian. It's just a terrible concept to use as an excuse for repressing civil liberties, or even the right of a girl who's been literally bludgeoned to death, tortured. As one of the, think that India should hang its head in shame, and UP should, because this is a caste issue. So I don't know what to do about it. The police has become trigger happy. The governments brush everything under the carpet. And this is becoming, I mean, if it wasn't so tragic, it would be ridiculous. I really have no answer for this. Jackpal, you know UP better than anybody else. Maybe you could help us understand what's happening.
No, it's a dilemma.
Dilemma.
There is one more question.
Yeah.
Again, it comes from Dr. Shubhangi. The question is, in the light of the manipulation of social media by corporations and governments, do you see them as democratic force?
I see them as?
Do you see them as democratizing force?
Yeah. Well, some sections of social media and some are not. I mean, most of them are not. Social media has been used very intelligently by these young people, I think, in the anti-CAA protest to talk about who will assemble where. I was very intrigued to know that how were they getting their message across. And then I was told that it is through the social media. So I think we just have to train ourselves to look for the positive aspects and support those. But right now we are in a mess. I think with these young people being put in jail, Pinjara Tod in Delhi University actually came up against right-wing student activism. And those poor kids have been put in jail. I can't believe which government imprisons its own students. I've not been able to understand. Two governments did so, and they both had to resign. Charles de Gaulle in France and Johnson, what was his name? Not Johnson, who followed Kennedy in the United States in the late 1960s. When they came through on students protesting in campuses against involvement in the Civil War, in the Vietnam War.
Okay.
Who was the president? He had to resign. I can't remember, sorry. Yeah, not Johnson. I can't remember.
What about Nixon?
No, it was not Nixon. 69, 70.
Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson.
It was Lyndon Johnson, yes.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, indeed.
He had to resign. So two presidents have had to resign because they've cracked down on their students. The first time I've seen students being jailed by a government. I mean, this is not, just don't do this.
I want to know if somebody is theorizing that rape is not a democratic issue, as sexuality is not.
Why would it
Sexual
not be a
oppression is not.
democratic issue? Women have control over their bodies. That's a democratic right, isn't it?
That's what
Savita?
I'm saying. You know,
Yeah.
how can you have an interpretation of death, of mutilation, of repression of the worst kind, and not question the framework within which a life is protected? A citizen's life is the first right to life.
Absolutely. Integrity of the body. I mean, that is
Integrity
one
of
of
the
the
body.
first rights that have come up. Yes.
And an argument of conspiracy, international conspiracy, does it weigh heavier than the national argument of people of India having rights to life and integrity of body? Does it weigh heavier? Could it override?
These are important questions. I'm afraid I mean, the answer should be obvious. Why it's not so obvious is beyond my comprehension.
Well, I think there is a question on the chat by Nick Nagar. He's also been seen here. I would like him to, Nick Nagar, could you ask the question directly? You can unmute your mic and
Why are civil societies unable to create? Yeah.
Okay.
Tell me. You want me to read it?
Since I can see him, Nick Nagar, I'm asking him to please
can you hear me?
with a question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hello, Nick Nagar.
Yeah,
please go ahead.
Yeah, I was asking the same question. It was about ma'am. Yeah, I was asking about the same thing. Even ma'am mentioned about it, and she was pessimistic about that. What's the way ahead? I mean, like we are seeing that most of the democratic institutions' credibility is at stake, and even the media has a huge trust deficit. So, is the change in the government is the only way ahead, or because even the students, they have been put behind the bar? So, is there any ray of hope or light in the tunnel?
Well, I thought the demonstrations which took place from 15th December onwards, right up till the outburst of communal rioting in Delhi, which everybody knows who started it, was very heartening, because this is a move in the right direction. You see, unless you have mobilization to identify the real issues apart from ones that are manufactured by people in power, you're going to have a repeat of state authoritarianism. It doesn't matter which political party you belong to. You see, states are inherently authoritarian. The only protection against states are laid down institutionally in the form of an independent judiciary, an independent media, rule of law, and citizen association. I mean, associations in civil society. If tomorrow one of you has a problem with your vice chancellor, who will you go to? You'll go to your students' organization. You can't go to the police. You'll go to your students' organization or teachers' organization to take up your case. So in a way, between the state and the individual, you need layers of protection. But if a government in power is going to whittle away at these layers and leave the individual unprotected, then all of us are vulnerable to all kinds of coercion by any government. Because we have to remember, no government is inherently authoritarian or inherently democratic. Governments have to be made democratic. Of course, change of government would be an important issue. But that government has also to be kept in check. That is why civil society doesn't push the boundaries of the political space. Civil society says, abide by constitutions. Just give us what you promised in the constitution. That is all. And even that is important. We are no longer speaking of taking over state power. In fact, civil society is called civil because civil society organizations do not compete for political power. I always had a problem with the National Advisory Council of Mrs. Sonia Gandhi. Actually, you guys are no longer civil society organizations, you've joined the state. But even that seems now irrelevant in light of what is happening to civil society. We have to understand that the attack on civil society is an attack on every protective layer that has been installed between the individual and the government. Otherwise, you are rendered completely vulnerable. I mean, tomorrow something happens, opposition is in a mess. Who do I go to tomorrow if any one of us gets attacked? Who do you go to? That's the biggest dilemma India is facing.
Can Yanthan, hello, Yanthan? Hello?
Yes, I can hear.
You can ask questions straight to ma'am, and I think this will be the last question. Yeah.
There is one more question. You must have seen on the chat as well. But the question is, why the civil societies are unable to create the space to develop space to contestation against hegemonic domination now?
You know, I think Nikos Polanzas, once upon a time we had a big debate on the relative autonomy of the state. And Greek theorist Nikos Polanzas, something very interesting. The job of the capitalist state is to unite warring factions of power and to disunite the working class. Now, what is happening is under a state which is devoted to the pursuit of raw power, you have state sanction to dominant forces coming together in any space, whether it is culture or it is, I mean, tell me the last time we had a meaningful debate on literature or culture or poetry or drama or films in India. You see, you cannot deny that the Nehruvian state gave a lot of space to these debates. You had meaningful debates on aesthetics. Savita is best place to tackle this question. You had a debate on aesthetics, you had a debate on modernity, you had several very important literary productions, poetry, theater. I still remember going to the National School of Drama to see their production of various plays, Lorca's, or GP Deshpande doing Chanakya. You know, they were subversive in their own way. Tell me, what is the height of our creative imagination today? A movie called Toilet, a Prem Katha? Is that a movie? I mean, just answer me. Where are the big debates today? About literature, about modernity, or postmodernity, or even about women? We don't have them. Now you have all kind of fluffy romances coming out which are impossible to read. We don't have any, I don't know, Savita, I don't know whether you agree with me, but I feel that major debates are not there.
Indeed, Meera. I mean, towards the end, maybe I'll say something about it. You know, the very fact that you're pointing out something like this it only denotes that it is missing. It is simply missing from our political consciousness, as if politics is all about how to fight election, how to do all the jod-tod. You know, just the bottom line, even politics has been de-aestheticized. Politics is the space where these important debates take place. That is why I'm talking about the framework. the framework itself in danger. We just do not know. They're put loose. I don't know what is coming up. Now the post-democratic theorists of post-democracy, now they're talking about taking responsibility as citizens, because that's the way to remind ourselves that we are citizens, and we sort of care for things more than elections, more than how to grab power and all that. It is this. Now people are talking about that, reviving ourselves, our thicker self. We have been, people have willingly, for the sake of enjoying liberties and freedoms as an individual, they willingly and philosophically thin themselves down. I mean, look at Rawls, for example. But now people are talking about thickening ourselves. It's like, because you are forced to become a plastic. You are not a living human being as if, all your brain cells are like, they're coded. There's certain information you can receive, certain you have to reject. This kind of sort of slimming you down to such an extent where you don't recognize who you were. You're losing consciousness of your being a citizen. It is this that is at stake. And I think that time is coming, Nira, when people will be said, what is so great in being a citizen? Why do you bother to live with a concept which was, Greek concept, 5th, 6th century old? Why do you want to have that? The pleasure of being a citizen, someone who enjoys to discuss justice, someone who enjoys to discuss friendship. Think of Aristotle and of poetics, of biology, same man, same philosophical mind. I mean, is it good to lose all of this and acquire something that I'm calling plastic self? I've just written something on this. It sounds pessimistic, but it is this that I think we are reaching. Like we are just codes. We are just certain kinds of coded structures who, on their own, make themselves rid of certain information, certain inputs.
I mean, who would have thought that the national media is going to give importance to a woman called Kangana Ranaut? Why does she make headlines? I've not understood. Answer, why is so? I mean, what the hell? Who are we talking to? It's not Naziruddin Shah who has something meaningful to say. Or MS Satyu or Tendulkar. I mean, what are you talking about? You're giving that woman, what is her name, Chakravarti girl, prime time on TV, 3 hours. I stopped watching television news. Why is it important? Why are Bollywood? I mean, Bollywood is important if it gives you meaningful cinema. These days, everybody hesitates. Now they're all seeming going to talk about national, patriotism and nationalism, and their star is Akshay Kumar. I don't understand. So in a way, the vibrancy of any civil society as a mode of protecting the individual can be gauged from its cultural creativity. You don't even have theater any longer. Young people will not appreciate this, but there was a time, every time Ratan Thyam staged a play, we would go in flocks to watch his spectacle. And the kind of spectacle Ratan Thyam can create, I still remember Chakravyuh, that Manipuri dance around Ashwatham. You just sat there, and now all we have is a Sanjay Leela Bansali doing the most crude forms of spectacle. So I don't see anything. I don't see music. I don't see literature. I don't see art. I don't see culture. I don't see anything. We just have idiotic, patriotic things. So in a way, I think we should be worried when your cultural production goes down to the level it has. Is it possible to fall anymore? I don't understand. I think somebody should work on it, the younger people, to see what has happened to our great debate. There was a time we were talking about, for example, Savita, we know Mohan Rakesh's Aadhay Adhure.
I know, we just going to say, Lehro ke Raj.
Yes.
We watched it, I think, together, the play. I think 1,000 times that play has been.
Of film festivals, watching Peter Brook's Mahabharat, I mean, they were subversive. They were questioning of power. We enjoyed it. questioning of gender roles, questioning of the way women are depicted. You watched it because it gave you food for thought. Today, what is there to watch? I don't understand what this present power elite has done to the cultural level of India is unforgivable and unforgettable. I don't think we'll ever retrieve those days again.
Meera, don't say that.
I think we have had a wonderful discussion, and really Professor Chandok has covered a wide range of issues, and the lecture has kept us all thinking. We will reflect on all these issues. It was a wonderful discussion. Now I'll invite Dr. Yanthan to give a word of thanks. Dr. Yanthan, unmute yourself, please.
Finally, we have come to the end of a very interesting, very enriching talk by Professor Neera Chandok. Well, I, on behalf of the discussion forum, School of Social Sciences, take this opportunity to say thank you so much to Professor Neera Chandok, ma'am, for giving out your time, accepting our invitation, and coming and sharing such a rich perspective on the importance of civil society. It was indeed a very profound and very enriching. Thank you so much for all the knowledge and the perspective that you have shared in today's presentation. And we look forward to having you even in the days to come. Well, I also take this opportunity to give thanks to Professor Japal Singh for effectively chairing today's session. Thank you so much, Professor Japal Singh, for being so kind and for chairing the session so well. And I also take this opportunity to say thank you very much to Professor Uma Ganjula, Director of COE, Center for Online Education, for providing us a space, not only on Zoom, but also, giving us a live online telecasting of today's special talk. Thank you very much. And I also would like to give thanks to our director, Professor Rashmi Sinaji. She has been very, very cooperative and very encouraging. So thank you very much, Professor Rashmiji, for being so good, for being so kind, and for being so cooperative. And Professor Savira Singh, even though she is just a participant, the kind of perspective she has shared has really added colors, a lot of knowledge to today's discussion. Thank you very much for sharing such a rich perspective, and we look forward to having you even in the days to come. And finally, I would like to give thanks to all the participants for your cooperation and for your participation in today's discussion and making today's program a success. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meera.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you once again. Yeah.
So it's concluded now.
Yeah, it's over now for today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much, Professor Chandok. Thank you.
Thank you so much.